Hey, what's going on, guys? In this video, we're going to create a project. We're going to create an image gallery using React and Tailwind CSS, and we're also going to use the Pixabay API, which is an image and video API to fetch all of these photos along with some data. And you can see I have a bunch of cards with images and tags and some data from the API, and they're all styled with Tailwind utility classes. And I also have this search component where we can say like cat, and we'll get some cat images, dog, whatever. If we put something that doesn't make sense, it'll just say no images found. Okay, so that's the app we'll be building. Now, as far as integrating Tailwind, we're actually going to use this article as a reference. This is from Smashing Magazine. It's an article by Blessing Crofega, I believe is how you pronounce his name. But he wrote a really nice article on how to integrate Tailwind with the Create React app workflow. So basically we'll use Tailwind along with Post CSS and Auto Prefixer, as opposed to just using like a CDN, because if you use a CDN, you can't customize Tailwind, and it's just nice to have it built into your workflow. So I'll have this link in the description. And if you're not familiar with Tailwind, it is a CSS framework, but it's different than Bootstrap and Materialize and the rest of them, because it's very low-level utility classes. Instead of having full components like alerts and cards, it has just little classes like text white, font bold, margin and padding classes, color classes, so you can really customize and create your own UI. Now, if you go down to where it says Getting Started, this is where he starts to show you the commands and what you need to install and set up and the config files and stuff like that. So we're going to do all this to get set up, but again, I'll have this link in the description if you want to reference it. Okay, and then once we get set up with our environment, we'll start on our image gallery functionality. So let's go ahead and jump into VS Code, and the first thing I'm going to do is create a React application. So I'm going to run npx create -react app -app and then dot to generate the files right in this folder. Okay, it's just an empty folder. Now that we have just a basic React app set up, we can go ahead and install our dependencies that we need. So these are going to be dev dependencies. So we want -uppercase-D, and we want Tailwind CSS. We also want Post CSS-CLI, and we want Auto Prefixer. Spell that right? Yeah. Now, Post CSS is basically it's gonna transform, or I should say compile our Tailwind CSS, and it's also going to allow us to use the Auto Prefixer plugin, which will set vendor prefixes within our CSS automatically where needed. Auto Prefixer actually uses the caniuse.com website to figure out where we need vendor prefixes. All right, so that's another advantage of doing it this way. Okay, so that's all set. Next thing we need to do is generate a Tailwind config file, and we can use npx for that. So npx Tailwind, and we want to run init, and then the name of the file, which is tailwind.js, and then we just want to add -- full on the end of that, and you can see that creates a Tailwind.js with all of our configurations. So screen size, colors, background colors, borders, just everything you can think of is in this config file. So you can really customize it. Now, we're not going to actually touch that. I'm going to leave it alone. The next thing we want to do is create a post CSS config file. So we're going to run touch post css.config.js, and we just need to add just a couple lines of code in here. So let's open that up and let's bring in Tailwind. So we want to say Tailwind CSS, and we're using the common JS syntax, the require syntax, because this is a config file. So we want to bring in Tailwind CSS, and then we want module.exports, and in here we want to add in plugins. Okay, so for plugins, we want Tailwind CSS, and we just need to pass in the location of the config file that we just created, which is in the root, and it's called tailwind.js. And then to use Auto Prefixer, we just need to require that here as a plugin. All right. And that should be good. So we'll just go ahead and save that. Now, inside of our source folder, we're going to want to create a folder called Assets. And this is where our CSS is going to go. So I'm going to create a file here called tailwind.css. And I'm also going to create a main.css, which is going to be our output. So in our Tailwind, we just need to add our imports. And if you've worked with Tailwind before, you probably have seen this. So we want to import, let's say, Tailwind CSS / base, which is like the normalize and all that stuff, the base classes. And then we want the components and the utilities. All right, so we'll just save that. That's all we need is these 3 lines. And what will happen is it'll get compiled into this main CSS, and this main CSS is what we'll include into our application. Now, we're not going to manually add anything here. It'll get added automatically, but we do want to go to our package.json, and we want to create a few extra scripts. So we want to create a build :CSS, and this is actually going to run post CSS, and then we need the location of the Tailwind CSS file, which we just created in the assets folder in the source. So tailwind.css, and then the output, so -o, the output is going to be source / assets / main.css. Okay, so that's our build. Now I'm going to just copy this down, and it's going to be the same exact thing, but this is going to be watch CSS. Okay, and then up here when we start our server, we want to run npm run watch CSS and the standard React script start. And then on build, same thing, we want to do npm run build :CSS && build. Okay, so that should do it. We should be able to run our server now, and it should generate the Tailwind classes into the main CSS. So let's run npm start. You can see right here, post CSS. Oops, I have something. I have the demo running on that port. So let me just shut that down, and let's run that again. And it should just open. The regular boilerplate React app. Yep, there we go. And if we go back and we look in main CSS, there we go. We have our normalized, so we have our base, our components, and our utilities from Tailwind getting compiled into this file. And you can see there's just a ton of utility classes. And if we do a search for, let's say, MOZ, you can see our prefixes. So those are getting created by auto prefixer. We have all of our WebKit vendor prefixes where needed. So yeah, so now we can just include that into our application. So that's pretty much the setup as far as integrating Tailwind. So now we're gonna start to work on our application. Now with Create React App, we get a ton of stuff we don't need. We're not going to do any tests, so we can get rid of that. Service worker, logo, index CSS, app.test, app.css. We can delete all this stuff. Basically, we just need the app and the index file. So in index.js, instead of including index CSS, which no longer exists, we're going to include assets main.css, okay, which is going to be all of our Tailwind stuff. We can get rid of this. We can get rid of this and save that, and then we can go to our app.js, which is our main component. We can get rid of these two, the logo and the app CSS, and then I'm going to get rid of everything within this div. And then for now, let's just put in h1 and let's try to use a utility class. So we'll do text-6xl and just say hello world. All right, so if we take a look at our app, you can see we have this big header. If I change this to, let's say, 3XL, now it's smaller. Good. So our classes are linked, and we're now able to use Tailwind. Now, the approach I'm going to take here is to first just build out a card. one of the image cards, and then we'll go ahead and work with the API and fetch the images and stuff like that. So for now, let's just go ahead and get this so we can see both screens. And I'm going to get rid of this H1, and we're going to go ahead and create a card. So, and we do that, there's no like card class like there is in Bootstrap or anything. We create it ourselves. So I'm going to set a max width small, and there's different classes for widths. I mean, this isn't really a Tailwind course. I do have a crash course that goes more into the classes, but the documentation is pretty good. So rounded is pretty self-explanatory. We can set overflow to whatever we want, so overflow hidden, without having to go into the CSS at all. Shadows, if we want shadows, you can see the different classes. So I actually have this pop up with the available classes. So we'll do shadow large. Let's see, let's add an image, and I'm going to give it a class of W-full. So that'll give it full width, basically 100% width. For the link to the image, let's use source.unsplash.com/random for now. And if I save that, we get an image. You can see it has the rounded corners as well. Now underneath that, we're going to have a div with some padding. So I'm going to do px, which is padding on the x-axis, so meaning left and right, and -6, which is a certain amount of rem units. I'm not exactly sure, but it is in the docs. And then py is padding on the top and bottom, and we're going to do 4 for that. And then in here we'll have a div. Let's do font -bold, and let's say text purple, and then we have different shades. We'll do 500. So they're pretty self-explanatory classes. Text XL will make it bigger, and then let's do MB2, so margin bottom 2. And then in here we're going to say photo by John Doe, and save, and now you can see we have that part of our card. Now I want to have some stats like the views and stuff like that, so I'm going to put a UL under this div, and let's put let's say strong. Oops, so strong, we'll say views, and we'll just do, I don't know, 4,000. All right, so we'll just grab this LI and copy it down twice. So we have views, we have downloads, and this of course is going to come from the API. We'll do 300, and then let's do likes, say 400 likes. Okay, so if I save that, we have that data. Now I want some tags styled with like a gray background and rounded corners. So I'm going to go under the div right here, and let's create another div with some padding. So we'll do px6, and let's do py4. Whoops. Okay, and then we're going to have a span here. Give this a class of inline block, which will just display it as inline block. The background, let's do gray 200, and let's do rounded -full, and padding on the left and right, we'll do px3. Let's do padding on the top and bottom, py1. We'll do text-sm, so text small, font semi-bold, and the text color, let's do text gray 700, and let's do margin right 2 to push the one next to it over. And for now I'm just going to do #tag1. Okay, so that gives us our little tag. Now I'm just going to grab this span, and we're going to have 2 more, and we'll call this one tag2 and tag3. And yeah, so we'll save that, and there we go. There's our card with a random image. So now we have this card created with these utility classes. So now we're going to start on, fetching our data and turning this into a component, looping through all the images and outputting the cards and stuff like that. So I'm going to make this a little bigger because this is kind of aggravating me. So yeah, I want that to be full width. And then let's go to the API documentation for Pixabay. You do have to create an account and log in to get an API key. I think I am logged in. You can see my API key right here. And I'm going to go ahead and just grab that. So let's copy that. And for our API key, I'm not just going to put it in the component. I'm going to create a .env file. And in here we can say this is for global variables, but we have to prefix it with React app underscore, and then we'll call it Pixabay underscore API underscore key, and set that here and close that up. Okay, so let's see. I'm trying to think of how I want to do this. Let's create our state. So our app level state, we're not using like context or Redux or anything like that. It's just going to go in the file. This is a small application. So let's bring in, which should be a comma. Let's bring in use state, and we might as well bring in use effect because that's how we're going to make our request, or where we're going to make our request from. And then down in the function here, we'll create our state. So we have images, and then we have set images, which we'll use to set the state. Set that to use state, and then the default for this is going to be an empty array because it's going to get filled once we make our request. Okay, we're also going to have an is loading and set is loading. Okay, and then the default for that is going to be true. So we set that to true so that once we're done fetching, we can then set it to false, and we can use that in our component. We're also going to have a term, so a search term. So set term, set that to use state, and we're just going to have an empty string by default for the term. All right, so that's our app level state. Now let's see, let's work on our request. So if we go back to this documentation, there's a URL right here. If I click on, you can see what it gives us: an object with a total hits, and then this hits array, which is the objects that include the images, including the URLs and the the views and downloads and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and let's add our use effect. So with use effect, we need to put in a function here, an arrow function, and then we're going to use our fetch API. Let's put some backticks in here, and we want to make a request to this URL. Okay, but there's some stuff we want to change. For instance, the key, I don't want to hard code it here. I want to use what's in my .env, so I can say process.env.react app Pixabay API key. I think that's what I called it. Let me just make sure. React app Pixabay API key. All right. So that should get the key. Now, as far as this right here, this queue, this query, instead of yellow flowers, it's going to be set to whatever the term is. And I believe if we just leave it empty like this, it'll just be random images. But you can set this to something if you want, like whatever, I don't know, cats, dogs, flowers, whatever you can put there. So yeah, so that will make the request. Now, this returns a promise, so we need to take our response, and we want to return JSON. You can use a sync await if you want. And then here, let's get our data, and let's just console log our data, and let's also add a catch. Okay, and then I'm just going to put for dependencies just an empty array at the end here. So let's go ahead and save that and go to our application, and let's open up our console. Whoops, I used class. Shoot, should I use class name here? Did I do that more than once? No. All right, so let's see what we're getting here. 400. So pixabay.com key, getting the term. Why are we getting 400? Oh, I know why. Because this key right here, we have it in our .env, and when you add something to that file, you have to restart your server. So I don't think it's, at least I think that's what's wrong. So let's go ahead and, why isn't this stopping? Oh, okay. So let's restart that. Okay, good. So now that's gone because it's getting our API key. So now let's take a look over here, and this is what we're getting. Same thing I just showed you in the browser. We're getting this hits array with each object has the web format URL is what we're going to use for the image source, and we have all this other stuff as well. So what we want to do is set that response, that hits array, to this images, to our state. So instead of console logging data, let's actually set that to a block, and we're going to call set images because we want to set our image state to data.hits, that array. Okay, and then we also want to set is loading to false because we already got the data. All right, so now that should put the images in our state. Never mind these. It's fine that we're not using any of this yet, but at least we're fetching the excuse me, we're fetching the data and we're putting it into our state. So what we need to do is basically loop through the images in our state and output a card for each one. So instead of putting everything in this file, I'm going to grab all of this excuse me, and I'm going to cut this and create a new folder in my source called components, and let's add image card.js and I'm using the React ES7 extension. I can use what is it, RAFCE. We'll create an arrow function component. If you don't have the extension, you can just copy this, and then we'll paste that in here. And obviously this is going to get updated with, you know, dynamic data, but for now I'm just going to keep it as is, and I like to add my semicolons. We'll save that, and then let's go back to app.js, and in here in our return, let's create a div with a container and an MX auto. So just a container and move everything to the middle. And then we want to basically want to loop through all of our images, but I want to put them in a grid. Otherwise, they're just going to be on top of each other. So we're going to have a class of grid. Also, we can let it know how many columns we want with grid dash call. I think it's, yeah, grid dash calls. Let's do 3. And then we can do gap. So grid gap, we'll do gap 4. Now in here, we're going to loop through our images, or I should say map through our images. So images.map, and for each image, we're going to go ahead and output the image card component. Did I even? No, I didn't bring it in. So we want image card, and that's going to come from components / image card. Okay, so we're looping through image card. Now we need to pass in a key since we're creating a list, and this needs to be a unique value. So let's use the image ID, and then of course we need to pass in the image itself as a prop. So we'll set that. Okay, let's take a look, and there we go. So now we have all these cards with these images. Now it's all the same image and same data because it's all hard coded right now. So let's fix that. Basically, we want to grab this image is being passed in from our state. Okay, we fetch the images, we set it as our state, and then we passed it into this component as a prop. So we access that through here. We could do props and have access to props.image, or we can just destructure and pass an image. All right, and then for the URL here, let's get rid of this for the source, and let's put image, and what we want is the web, what is it called again? Let's look at the response here. So right here, web format URL is what I want for the source, like that. So if I save that, we take a look. Now we have all different images. Okay, so let's do the rest of the data. So the user, so images, or image.user, views, so image.views, and downloads. And if you want to use different data that's returned, that's fine as well. And then we have likes. Okay, so if I save that and we take a look, let's just close that up. So we have photo by, and you can see they're all different names, and then we have the stats. Now for this, for the tags, if we look at how this is formatted, tags is a comma separated value. So I actually want to turn this into an array and then loop through that array and then output, one of these spans for each one. So to do that, let's go ahead and create a variable called tags, and we're going to take the image tags, which is a comma separated value, and we're going to call split. And what split does is it takes a string and turns it into an array, and we want to split it by the comma so that each word is in its own array item. Now down here where we have these spans, I'm just gonna cut one of these and then get rid of the rest of them, and we want to loop through or map through the tags. So tags.map, and say for each tag we want to output span. Actually, let's put that in here like that, and then we can just replace this with tag. Okay, and then this is also going to need a key since it's a list. So let's say key, and we don't have an ID. Well, I guess, yeah, we could use the image ID. Yeah, we'll just do that, image ID. All right, so let's go ahead and save that and take a look. And now if we check out the tags, we've converted them from the comma separated value list into an array and then output these tags in this style. All right, cool. So let's see, the next thing we want to do, let's close that up. I think we're done with image card, so we can close that. I want to have it so that if it's loading, it will show like the text loading. Because remember, we have this value here, which is set to true by default, but then is set to false after we get our data. So what we'll do is wrap this grid div right here. Let's put curly braces around that, so there and there. And let's use a shorthand, a ternary operator here. So we'll say if is loading, then do something. Just put quotes for now. Else, then go ahead and show our images. So what I want to show is an H1, and I'm going to give this a class of text. Let's do 6XL text dash center MX dash auto, like that. Actually, let's also add a little margin top. So now if we save that and I go back and I reload, actually let's you know what I'll do is, wait, what's this? Oh, encountered 2 children key with the same. Okay, I had a feeling that might happen. So in the image card, where I use the image ID for the key for the span. We don't want to do that. What I'll do is pass in tag and index, because index is a second, you can get as a second parameter to in map, and we'll set that to the index and save. That will get rid of that. Okay, now as far as the showing the loading, I just want to go to my network tab and make this slower so we can see. I'll just do fast 3G. And now if I reload, okay, it's still not showing the loading. Is loading. Oh, I didn't put any text in. Idiot. All right. Let's try that again. Okay, so you can see the loading flashes when it's actually fetching the data. All right. So let's go ahead and make sure we put this back to online. Good. So the next thing we'll do is add the search form, which is going to be a separate component. So in components, let's create image search.js. And I'll go ahead and generate an arrow function component here. And I like to add my semicolons. I don't have auto format on, which I usually do. I don't know why I shut it off. So image search is going to be a form. And I think I'm just going to paste this in because I don't feel like typing out all these classes. So this div I'm going to replace right here. And this is almost identical to the underline form in the documentation in the Tailwind CSS docs. But this has, you know, max, width, small, rounded, overflow. We have putting it in the middle. Our form here is full width. We have a div that's going to use flex. So you can use flexbox to align the input in the button. And then make sure your button has a type of submit because we will be submitting the form. And let's go ahead and save that and just bring it into app.js. Obviously it has no functionality, but we'll just bring it in to display it. So image search, and then we're going to put this right below this div. And save. And there we go. So there's our search. Okay, it doesn't do anything, but it's there. Now, this needs some local state, right? Because it has a text input. So what we'll do is bring in use state into our search, and then let's create, we'll call this text, and then set text. And that's going to be empty by default. And then on the input, we need to have an on change event, because when we start to type, when we change, we need to update the state. So we're going to have an arrow function here with an event parameter, and then call set text and set it to e.target.value, which will give us whatever is being typed in the form. So if I save that, I mean, we can check this out in the dev tools here. So if we were to look at image search and I start to type, you can see down here under hooks, under state, that's going to be put in the state. Okay, and that's the local search component state, not the app level state. This is the app level state. Now what needs to happen is when we submit this, we need that to get put into the term, which is our app level state, because then we need to make another request with that term. Now the way we do that is through props. So let's see, in our app.js, we're going to have this image search right here is going to have a set text prop, and that's going to be a function that we call inside image search. And when it's called, we're going to go ahead and have a function that gets the text passed in, and then we can set the term with that text. Okay, so in image search, we now need to have our what did I call it? So the prop is called, wait a minute, I don't want this to be called set text, search text. Yeah, so we'll set that to search text because this is set text, so we don't want to do that. So yeah, in here we'll pass in search text. Yeah. Oh, this actually needs to be destructured. Now we need to have an on submit on our form. So on submit, and I'll just create a separate on submit function right here. So const on submit, and let's set that to an arrow. Okay, it's going to take in an event parameter, and then we want to prevent the default. And then all we need to do is call that search text and then pass in whatever is in that text in our local state. Okay, so basically whatever is in the input. Now once we call that, it's going to catch it right here. Okay, and it's going to then set the term, which will set this in our state right here. Why is that dark? It's being used. Set term. I don't know. Well, that should work. Now, in order for this to be called again, this fetch request, we need to add term as a dependency. So what this means is that whenever term changes, this will run again. So let's go ahead and save that, and hopefully that works. Let's just open up our console here and make sure nothing's wrong. And let's search for cats. Cool. So it works. Dogs. Computer. Good. Now, if I just put like nonsense in here, I mean, we get an empty page, but I'd like it to say that there's no images found. So what we could do is go, where do we want to go here? Let's go right above this is loading and put a conditional here. Whoops. And we want to say if it's not loading and the images dot length, so we're checking the length of the images array in our state. If that's equal to 0 and it's not loading, then now we could put a ternary and then an else, but we don't even need an else, so we can use the double ampersand, and then we'll just put an h1 here. Actually, let's just copy this h1 and put that there. We'll change it to 5xl, and instead of loading, it's going to say no images found. All right. So it's just making sure it's not loading and the length is 0. So it should, the reason I'm checking to see if it's not loading is that we should have already fetched it. Otherwise, it's just going to show it, all the time. So let's try that out. We'll go ahead and put some nonsense in here and search, and we get no images found. Good. And that's it. We have our little application, and you now know how to integrate Tailwind CSS with Create React app and set up a little workflow. So that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next video.